Yeah, it's just, yeah, now it works.
Okay. That's good. Okay, go ahead.
No pressure. Now I'm being recorded. Okay. In Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So I have a very, very small topic to give today. I'm not being sarcastic. No, I am being a little bit sarcastic. No, I'm supposed to do the culture of isms. So it's a pretty massive topic, and I only have like 30 to 35 minutes to do it. But so I decided, instead of trying to go like, secularism, humanism, modernism, and just describe these and then I can't just give you these things and not give a response, like an Orthodox response. So I said, we'll hone in on one specific one that kind of includes all the others and gives us a bit of perspective, and then a bit of the Orthodox response, but it won't take long at all today. So basically, I've chosen to talk about secularism. Does anybody know what secularism is? What is it?
It's like when you're against religion, you feel like, not against Christianity specifically, but like society should be completely separated from religion, systematic structures.
And it's so hard to hear. Can you put the microphone closer to your mouth?
It's like when you're very against religion being used to influence systematic, what's it called, infrastructures.
Okay. I think he said something along the lines of, when you're so against religion that it becomes a systematic infrastructure that is against it or something. You set up a structure that's against it?
Anti-religion.
Huh?
Anti-religion.
Yes. Got it. Yeah, very good. Essentially. Yeah, secularism is the idea that religion, and like when we talk about politics, for example, Thomas Jefferson, well-acclaimed politician in the States, he's one of the people to introduce the concept of separation of church and state. So that's a form of secularism in a way, right? There's different flavors of secularism politically too. For example, in Quebec and in France, Quebec where we are, there's a concept of laïcité, where you don't, have a public display of religion at all. You can't have your cross out, you can't wear a veil in public offices. Here in Quebec, it's not as intense because it's still part of North America, but in France, it could be very like stringent, and they're not as easygoing as they are here. Anyways, so my point isn't to tackle it from the political perspective, but from more of a ideological, philosophical overview of everything. So to give a little bit of background, we'll have to rewind to maybe the 13th, 14th century, even before that. Has anybody heard of the term scholasticism before? Are you guys able to hear me, or is my okay, cool. So to kind of get the idea of how all of this evolved and what was the progression and the development of secularism, and we kind of have to go a little bit far back to a period where let's say scholars, and this is a good thing, right? Scholars began establishing universities around the world. This is the period of time where universities start propping up all over the world, whether all over Europe, in Ireland, mainly Europe. And it's in that time where they start introducing the concept of reason to understand religion. So it's very friendly. It looks towards religion in positive terms, and faith and divine revelation as being the highest form of knowledge, but now using reason to dissect this wisdom. Okay, so what ends up happening in the scholastic period is they have all these manuals. You'll hear about, I'm sure people have heard the name Thomas Aquinas before, or you hear of maybe Anselm of Canterbury. You'll have these names that come up in the medieval times where they're using reason and manuals and treatises to talk about the faith. And they'll begin at this time to start to dissect what is the Eucharist? How does the bread and wine become the body and blood? And they turn things a little bit into a science. Okay, so they start to subject things to reason at this point. So far, not really anything new, but what ends up happening is they're paving the way now for this development of knowledge where you have an alternate route to understanding and building your knowledge than divine revelation. So what ends up happening is shortly before the Protestant Reformation, there's a period of time called the Renaissance. Anybody hear of the name Michelangelo before? Michelangelo was at the time of the Renaissance. So this is a point where the arts are flourishing, and for the first time, they're what's the word I'm looking for? Resurrecting or bringing back, reviving old humanism from pagan times. What's humanism? It's talking about man as the measure of all things, seeing things now from a completely different perspective where it's, human-centric. So you have all these paintings now that are with the perspective of the anatomy. So you look at, like, for example, the Sistine Chapel, and look at the paintings of the Sistine Chapel, extremely intricate and detailed. And it's human-centric, right? So that's the Renaissance. And at this point, people start asking a lot of questions. Like, you've gotten some time now where reason is playing a huge role in understanding religion. People are like, well, what's been going on with the Catholic Church? We can't read the gospel in our language. And what are all these rites and rituals? So this is where we get the word superstition from, right? When we say that person is superstitious, or something is superstitial, it means it's something on top of something else. Super, over, on top of, and stitial is like a layer on top of. So what's the point? Is they're saying, let's strip down to the bare minimum of the faith. We don't need all this extra stuff that's been added through time. So in the Protestant Reformation, what you end up having is this growing separation between the sacred, the supernatural, the forgive me, the quote unquote spooky parts of religion. So let's get rid of the saints. Let's get rid of the angels and all of that stuff. The miracles, let's take it a little easy on that. All this like sacrament stuff, it's unnecessary. And this talk about, the priest does this and that, all of that, like the sacramental function of the priest gets put into question. So what ends up happening is there's this period where the world is becoming, quote unquote, disenchanted. No longer is it a place populated by saints, angels, and a world of wonder and spirit, but it becomes stripped down to this kind of mechanistic world where I can study things. It's also at the same time of the scientific revolution. The Protestant Reformation happens hand in hand with the scientific revolution. Now I can study the world. Now I can subject everything to my rational scrutiny. And no longer is the church as relevant as it used to be. And even if I am a Christian, in this case Protestant, I am questioning a lot of what I've been handed as, tradition, and like superstitious tradition. It's all this extra stuff that I don't need. So you're now kind of diluting the faith in a way, or taking a big part of it, that supernatural, that sacraments, right? This involvement of the church in our everyday life, where like eating, drinking, oil, all of that kind of stuff gets put in its own category. So that evolves and develops more and more. And now soon thereafter, you have a period known as the Enlightenment. I'm sure people have heard of the Enlightenment period. So we talked about the Scholastic period very early on, then Renaissance, Protestant Reformation, And then now the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment now is where people really start to question religion. So all that reason that's been building up, we're going to take that reason and start to, instead of dissect and understand religion, we're going to question religion itself, right? So whether you want to call this good or not, people started to actually have to come to grips with their faith, right? Because now it's under attack and it's actually being criticized. And so now people who are complacent and just took things for granted actually had to, more actively believe in it or proactively come to terms with it. And those who didn't, well, you couldn't be nominally Christian anymore. You basically could start to question things and be either even atheist in some circles, right? So the Enlightenment is this whole period of time where you have people like David Hume, completely questioning, criticizing religion. Who else? Immanuel Kant on some level. You have Spinoza. These names are a lot of philosophers at this time. And then what ends up happening during the Enlightenment is this growing rift between the church and the state. So the church has caused so many wars in the past. You have all the Protestant Catholic wars in Europe. The church has caused, given the priests too much power to prey on people. Let's separate church and state. So you have people like Thomas Jefferson, who in the wake of the Enlightenment, right? He's in the 18th century. He's saying, no, forget it. We're not giving the church any privileged status. The church is an entity on its own, and the government is an entity on its own, and the government doesn't need interference from the church, and the church doesn't need interference from the government. So, you ask some Christians, and they think that this is a great thing because now the state shouldn't be interfering with the church either. So my point here is that unfortunately, this has affected how we see the world as Orthodox Christians. So the problem with this kind of mentality of secularism is what? Is it separates the world into two kind of camps. There is, or as they like to say, the two-story universe. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term before, the two-story universe. There's the upper level where God and all this spiritual stuff exists. And there's a lower level where, the real world is, where like my work, my school, my friends, all of that kind of stuff, the world outside of the church, basically. So what ends up happening is there's a really sharp wedge that's driven between the two. And to really kind of understand the essence of the problem here and how it affects our day-to-day lives as Orthodox Christians, is to take it back, as always, to Genesis. So in Genesis, who remembers the name of the two plants that were given? Big plants, trees. What are the two trees in the Garden of Eden? Well, come on, you guys have to know this. Come on. There's two trees in the Garden of Eden. Give me one of them.
Forbidden tree.
What's it called? You could do better than that.
The tree of knowledge.
What's that? Yeah, you said
Tree of knowledge.
of what? Very good. Huh?
Of good and evil.
Good job. Okay. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and what's the other tree?
The answer that's going around here is tree of life.
Very good. Okay. So I'm pretty sure we talked about this before in our liturgy talk, but we'll recap. Excuse me. There's two trees in the heart of the Garden of Eden, okay? In the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what was it that the serpent told Adam and Eve eating it would do to them? What was the temptation behind it?
Serpent was tempting them with knowing everything, the pursuit of knowledge.
Kind of. There's even more to it. What's that?
They wanted to be smarter than God.
Close. But there's another thing that he said, that you will be very simple. Like God. Okay, good. So he doesn't, but this is exactly how he frames it. He says, no. Because he first proposes it to Eve, and then she says, no, we're not supposed to. And he says, he doesn't want you to have it because he knows you're going to be like him. But what was it that Adam and Eve were created in the first place?
God's image.
Image and likeness, right? They were made to grow in the image and likeness of God. So what is it that Satan offers? A counterfeit. What's a counterfeit?
Fake.
Yeah, it looks like the real thing, but it isn't. So what is it that the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents? It's creation. It's the concept of being a God on your own terms. The tree of life, good tree. You eat from tree of life, you're good to go, right? It's part of what's, for lack of a better word, kosher in the Garden of Eden. It's what's blessed by God. And in that, you continue to grow in the image and likeness of God, right? In the way that he sets out. But there's the one tree that you can't eat, right? Because for there to be a choice to stay with God, there has to be the choice to leave, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that choice to leave. If there was no tree of knowledge of good and evil, they would never have a choice to leave. They'd be trapped there. And then it wouldn't be a true sacrifice of love, right? So here's the point, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil is, as we said, trying to become a God on your own term. On your own terms. So it's called self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency, right? Versus being a God on God's terms. So you're submitting and then uniting. And then growing in that image and likeness. So tree of life is participation in the creation by growing in the image and likeness of God. Tree of knowledge of good and evil, participation in creation as a thing to be taken and used for my own pursuit and for making me self-sufficient and thinking I can depend on creation as an end in itself, right? I can use money and be rich and powerful and do all that I want and seek all the pleasure I want from it on my own terms. I can eat, on my own terms, whatever it is. It's creation seen as an end in itself, rather as something, as a means to something greater. Versus the tree of life is creation loved, a creation used or participated in as communion with God. Why as communion with God? Because the sin here, the bottom line, the sin that Adam is guilty of, which we're all guilty of, is thinking that it's the life of this world that sustains us, right? That I can survive or exist off the food of this world as a thing in itself and be self-sufficient simply for my taking of the food of this world. If I take the food of this world, I'll be fine. If I have the X amount of money, I'll be fine. If I eat this amount of food, I'll be fine. But rather, in the tree of life, who is the true source, right? I'm taking it from his hand because he's blessed it. Who's the true source of my life? God. In the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I'm saying the true source of my life, I'm doing it on my own terms. I'm doing away from him, right? I want to become a God without God. I'm doing it as it's an end in itself. I'm going to do it just through creation. But in the tree of life, I'm receiving creation And as as God himself being the provider of that food, as God himself being the source of my life, or to take it even further, as God himself being the bread of life, right? I am the bread of life. So what is it an image of? It's the image of the Eucharist. Why? Because the tree of life shows us that our dependence on food ultimately is our dependence on God, not on the food itself. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but labor for the food which endures to everlasting life. That doesn't mean don't eat. It means when you eat, you understand you're receiving something from God. So be thankful when you receive it, right? That's the mystery of the Eucharist, because Eucharist means thanksgiving. Thanksgiving because I know that what I'm receiving is a gift from God, and therefore I'm not being nourished by protein, carbohydrates, whatever, or these calories. I'm being nourished by God himself, which is his body and blood. So that's the mystery of the liturgy. Anyways, to put it back into perspective of what we were saying about secularism, is what ends up happening when I separate myself from the tree of knowledge of good, from God by the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I've chosen the path to say that there is a world that exists without God, right? You talk about secular humanism, that's exactly what it seeks to do. It seeks to define the world on its own terms without reference to God, without reference to the very source of everything, right? But inevitably, if I'm not finding the definition of everything anchored in the infinite, and I'm just looking at everything else as its own value, where am I anchoring all value in the end, right? I'm lost. I have to anchor it back to the original source, and then I can understand everything else. So secularism brings us to this point where I'm loving creation as an end in itself, and I'm seeing myself existing in a two-story universe. At the top level, God exists, and the bottom level is creation and the world where the real world is. But in the liturgy, we remedy this, right? We say, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Now, in the liturgy, when I restore true communion with Christ, I can now, right? The liturgy, as I'm sure you've heard before, doesn't end with Imdu b'Salem, or go in peace. The liturgy is a continued process of taking all creation and bringing it back to the altar on Sunday, right? I bring my whole world with me to the altar. And that way, every single day, every meal I participate, every conversation I engage in, every person I speak to, every task at work, every project I submit is part of the creation given to me by God in the tree of life, and therefore a communion with and in and through God, right? A communion with God through that. If I receive it thankfully, and I give myself in that task. So secularism, to also add, a lot of these concepts that I'm talking about, just so that I give you guys some something to look at. Here it is. Where is it? Can you guys? What do you guys see right now? You only see me, huh? I'm trying to share. This computer's all in French. It's not my computer, sorry. Anyways, okay. So I'm reading, a lot of these concepts are from a book called For the Life of the World by Father Alexander Schmemann, which I highly recommend. I don't think there are few books that I can count. Sorry?
What's the book called?
For the Life of the World. But this needs slow study. It needs if you ever have a book club or, pardon me, or anything like that, it's totally worth the read. It takes time. You have to go page by page and try to understand every paragraph, discuss, ask Abuna, and consult it takes time, but it's it's so worth the read, right? It's one of those classics that are going to go down in history as a real eye-opening book. It's definitely been instrumental and revolutionizing how I see things as well. So For the Life of the World talks about everything I've been saying, but from the perspective of the liturgy in all its forms. So whether it be the Eucharist or the liturgy of baptism or the funeral prayers, even, it talks about this constant theme throughout the book is about secularism. And one of the problems of secularism is because we often see it from the, from the perspective of the non-religious. But the problem is even the religious, in terms of the world, he talks about how Christianity destroys or abolishes or fulfills religion. Why? Because when there's a wall of separation or a two-story universe between God and man, religion is a coping mechanism, right? It's a coping mechanism. It's not life itself. It's something that you do on the side. So what ends up happening, for example, in Judaism or in other religions and paganism especially, you have sacred sites, right? You have temples, you have places where you can go. You have, you have sacred relics, you have all these things. And I'm not saying that that's not part of the Orthodox Church today. It is, obviously, and there's holy places, but the understanding here is fundamentally different. Whereas there's an actual distinction between the sacred and the profane. There are areas where this is not a holy area, and there are areas where it is holy, right? So there's still a separation, and religion becomes this place where you have people treating God as a coping mechanism, either as an escape from the world, which is now dirty, corrupt, and polluted in and of itself, right? And you have that religious mentality sometimes where you have to look at the world with disdain. You have to see the world as ugly and repugnant because it's become secular. Yeah. But the same people who do this are buying into the same exact paradigm, the paradigm of God's over here, the world's over here. What do we say in the liturgy? Heaven and earth are full of your glory and honor. Yes, the world is fallen, but Christ has transfigured the world and the cosmos on the cross. And we are now the beginning, and the church is the starting point where now the kingdom expands to fill every corner of my world and those around me. So yes, the church is particularly sacred. Yes, there are sacred relics, but it doesn't stop there. It begins there. Now I can go everywhere, and everywhere I mark the sign of the cross, it is now holy ground, right? It's not holy ground in the sense of this thing that's been put on top of it. It's now revealing the true essence of it. This place is where the tree of life can now grow. This is the place where communion of God can once again be restored. The world in and of itself seen in its true essence as being a paradise, right? And now I can go to, right, when we say the Thanksgiving prayer, wherever I might be, whether it's on the bus, it's in the car, it's, preferably at home, right? So you can give it its full attention. But anywhere you pray, you say, what do you say? You say, wherefore we ask him to your goodness, Lord, grant us complete soul eating. Oh my goodness. Grant us complete holy day all the days of our life, all peace with your fear, all envy, all temptation, all the work of Satan, plots of the wicked and the rising of enemies, hidden and manifest. Take them away from us and from your people. And you should, when you do this, cross yourself. And from this holy place that is yours, also cross. Of course, if you're in the presence of a priest, the priest takes that role. Whoever is leading the prayer takes the role on behalf of all those attending. But when you're praying anywhere, you're also crossing, making from this holy place that is yours. Those words are not just used because it's still in church. It's because you're extending the church out and seeing that everywhere else. So to recap everything, I won't go much longer than that. Secularism is something where it can affect both those in the church and those outside the church, where we really do see this separation between God and the world. And we have to, run to church in order to find a safe haven from the world. But this same mentality is also what causes us not to be witnesses of Christ, right? To be evangelizing the world, to rebaptize the world, and to transfigure the world with our lives by bringing God back to our work, back to our school, back to our whatever it might be. So that's really it. I hope I didn't cause any confusion or drag on for too long. How was my timing? It's okay. Okay. Do you guys have questions?
Secularism bad?
Questions or comments?
Is secularism bad?
Yeah, but I hope you have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective on it. Secularism is, again, politically speaking, you can have your opinion on it, right? There's good and bad to it, because and many times when church was indistinguishable from the state, you had persecutions, you had also the church being meddled within, right? The affairs of the church being meddled by the state. So that's not a good thing. But so politically, it can be a good thing. I think that's my personal opinion. It can also be a bad thing, right? Where it becomes aggressive in whatever form. But here I'm tackling it more from the way it's kind of penetrated our lives and how we see the world. That I see my watching television. That's something I do on my own time, right? I gave my tithes, leave me alone. And I go to church on Sunday, and that kind of mentality, or the mentality, and I'm only touching the surface, right? If you go read the book, he goes way deeper into how we view death, how we treat the dead in funeral prayers, how we understand baptism and this entry into the church, how we look at the liturgy, right? And some people treat the liturgy like it's this pretty thing that we do, and it's all just symbols, and we have to keep the tradition. And then after that, you can do whatever you want with your time, instead of seeing the liturgy as a more holistic thing. So there's way more to be discussed here, but I just wanted to give a small flavor of it. And I wanted to focus on that picture of paradise, tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. Tree of life is creation seen as food from God, or sustenance and from the true source of life. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil as creation seen as an end in itself, and as we being self-sufficient without God in that creation. If there's anything to take away, take that away, and understand that secularism sees the world in terms of the latter, as this place where you can live without God. Any other questions?
When are you coming back to Tallahassee?
No promises yet, but I'll try to come in January, February for real. Those months are going to be a lot easier, because probably going to be traveling in November and December, but I might come for a good while in January, February. We'll see. Just stay on my case. Stay on my case, and we'll try to plan something. Anything else? Any comments? Okay, thank you.
I think it's gonna disconnect any minute now. But
Sorry?
thank you, Peter, for
Yeah.
No, I think it's 4 minutes are up, so it's gonna disconnect any second now. But anyway, thank you so much for your time and giving us this beautiful lecture, and keep us in your prayer.
Thank you. Please pray for me as well. My pleasure, my blessing.
Now, I'm going to send the message, George. Why should I send a message about the retreat? The next, I think it's later this month sometime. It's for college, just for college youth. So make sure you look into that. So we don't want to forget about it. And yeah, it's called Brothers of Christ after the 28th century. So it's a game from here.
It's men's only.
And it's boys only. Now, y'all gonna set up for prayer?
All right, guys. Oh, we pray. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Stand up. Oh, okay.
No, those guys, I don't know, they do, just, this year, make us like the word, make us Lord to understand how we are Christians all the time, and just not part-time Christians. Be with us at all times and light in our lives, through the intercession of our ladies and Marys and George and all the saints that we've been here, make us very thankful. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy Anybody sit on next week? Next week, I think that.
Bye, guys.
All right.